Every parent knows the weight of watching their children go without, and Noah Alvarez felt that burden crushing his chest every single day. After losing his wife and his factory job, this father of twins was barely keeping his family afloat in a cramped motel room, working 3 jobs just to survive. Then he spotted an abandoned food truck behind an old gas station. Everyone said it was cursed, but Noah saw hope. With his late wife's recipes and his last few dollars, he bought that broken truck and started serving tacos. His kids helped him fix it up, and when his son posted a video online, everything changed. Suddenly, customers were lining up around the block, but success brought new problems. Debt collectors came calling, big corporations tried to steal his recipes, and Noah discovered the truck had a mysterious past tied to a famous chef who disappeared 20 years ago. How did this struggling dad turn one abandoned truck into a $10 million business? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through the thin walls of room 237 at the Desert Palms Motel at 4:47 a.m., 3 minutes before Noah Alvarez had set it to ring. He'd been awake anyway, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of nowhere. The stain had grown since they'd moved in 8 months ago, spreading like his worries across the cracked plaster. Noah rolled out of the sagging bed carefully, his feet finding the cold linoleum floor without a sound. Across the cramped room, his 15-year-old twins slept in the other bed. Sophie curled up with a dog-eared copy of 100 Years of Solitude pressed against her chest, while Leo sprawled across his half, with earbuds still tangled in his dark hair. The boy never could sleep without his music, just like his mother. The thought of Maria hit him like it always did, sudden and sharp, a knife between his ribs. 3 years gone, and still he reached for her side of the bed in those drowsy moments before dawn. Still saved the last sip of his coffee for her. Still caught himself buying her favorite oranges at the market before remembering. Noah pulled on his Desert Mesa construction t-shirt. The logo faded from too many washes in the motel's coin-operated machines. First job started at 6 a.m. sharp, and Supervisor Martinez had made it clear that being 5 minutes late meant being unemployed. In this economy, in this town, nobody got second chances. Outside, the desert air still held the night's coolness, but Noah could already feel the promise of another scorching day building on the horizon. Sierra Mesa had always been hot, but the drought had turned the heat mean. 3 years without substantial rain had withered the alfalfa farms and shuttered the processing plants. When Consolidated Foods closed their facility, the town's largest employer, it took 800 jobs with it, Noah's included. He'd been a line supervisor there for 12 years, working his way up from the loading dock to a position that came with a small office and the respect of his crew. The pay had been good enough to buy a modest house on Maple Street, where Maria had planted a garden that bloomed with tomatoes and cilantro, and the marigolds, she said, kept the bad spirits away. Where the twins had taken their first steps on the hardwood floors, Noah had refinished himself. The house was gone now, sold to pay Maria's hospital bills. The garden was someone else's responsibility, and Noah found himself measuring his life in the currency of hourly wages and weekly motel payments. "Morning, Noah." The voice belonged to Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who managed the motel office. She was already up, sweeping the walkway with methodical precision. "Kids sleep okay?" "Like angels," Noah replied, the lie coming easily. Leo had been restless all night, tossing and turning, probably dreaming about the video game console he'd been saving for since Christmas. Sophie had been up past midnight again, reading by the light of her phone because the bedside lamp had burned out 2 weeks ago and replacement bulbs weren't in the budget. "That's good to hear." "Oh, and Noah?" Mrs. Chen's voice carried a note of apology. "The owner called yesterday. He's raising the weekly rate, $50 more starting next month." Noah's stomach dropped, but he kept his expression neutral. $50 might as well have been 50,000. "Thanks for the heads up, Mrs. Chen. I'll figure something out." She nodded, her weathered face kind but helpless. They both knew the arithmetic. In a town where decent housing was scarce and competition for rentals was fierce, the Desert Palms could charge whatever they wanted. Noah and his family weren't the only ones living week to week in these faded rooms. The drive to the construction site took him through the heart of Sierra Mesa, past the boarded-up storefronts and the for rent signs that had been up so long they'd bleached white in the sun. Murphy's gas station sat on the corner of Main and Desert View, its windows papered with notices for lost dogs and garage sales and job opportunities that paid minimum wage. Behind it, in the gravel lot where weeds pushed through the cracks, sat the food truck. Noah had noticed it the first week they'd moved to the motel. Sun-faded and covered in graffiti, it looked like something from a different era. The locals called it cursed, said it had been sitting there for 20 years, that anyone who tried to make it work ended up broke or worse. But this morning, as the early light hit its dented aluminum sides, Noah saw something different. He saw possibility. The workday passed in a blur of concrete and rebar, the sun climbing higher until the air shimmered with heat. Noah's crew was pouring foundation for a new strip, more the kind of development that promised to bring jobs and prosperity, but usually delivered another row of empty storefronts. Still, it was work, and work meant another week at the Desert Palms. During his lunch break, Noah sat in the shade of the cement mixer and pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked from when Leo had dropped it last month, but it still worked. He opened his banking app and stared at the numbers. After this week's pay, after the motel rent and groceries and Leo's asthma medication, they'd have exactly 127 left. The math was simple and brutal. "Rough day?" asked Jimmy Santos, one of his crew members, settling down beside him with a bologna sandwich. "Just thinking," Noah replied. "About what?" Noah hesitated. Jimmy was a good man, had been laid off from Consolidated Foods the same day Noah had. But desperation made people do strange things, and Noah had learned to keep his thoughts to himself. Nothing important. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. It was the way Sophie's eyes lit up when she talked about the art scholarship to State University, and how quickly that light dimmed when she calculated the costs. It was Leo's quiet acceptance when Noah had to tell him that the robotics camp he'd been dreaming about wasn't in the budget. It was the weight of being the only thing standing between his children and a future that looked increasingly uncertain. That evening, Noah stopped by the grocery store on his way home. The twins were waiting in the motel room, probably doing homework on Leo's laptop, the one luxury Noah had refused to give up because education was the only ladder out of this hole. He moved through the aisles with military precision, buying only what was necessary: rice, beans, ground beef, onions, and the few items that transformed basic ingredients into something that tasted like home. At the checkout, he counted out bills and coins while the cashier waited with practiced patience. Behind him, a woman fumbled through her purse, muttering about prices and paychecks. Behind her, a man in a business suit tapped his credit card impatiently, probably spending more on lunch than Noah made in a day. "Dad!" Leo's voice carried across the motel parking lot as Noah pulled up. The boy was sitting on the concrete walkway outside their room, his laptop balanced on his knees. "Mrs. Chen said you might need help carrying stuff." The offer was typical Leo, always thinking of others, always ready to help. But Noah could see the real reason in his son's eyes. The boy was hungry, and dinner couldn't come soon enough. "Thanks, my Joe," Noah said, handing Leo the lighter bag. "Where's your sister?" "Inside. She's reading again." Noah found Sophie exactly where Leo had said she'd be, curled up in the room's single chair with a book. She looked up as he entered, her dark eyes so much like her mother's that Noah's breath caught. "How was work?" she asked, marking her place with a finger. "Good. Long. The usual." He began unpacking groceries on the small table that served as their kitchen counter. "What are you reading?" "Garcia Marquez, for Spanish class." She held up the book. "It's about this family that lives through 100 years of history, all their triumphs and tragedies." Noah smiled. Sophie had always been the reader, the dreamer. Even as a little girl, she'd preferred books to toys, stories to television. Maria used to say that Sophie had inherited her grandmother's gift for seeing the world in colors and textures that others missed. "Sounds heavy," Noah said. "It is, but it's also beautiful. It's about how families survive, how they pass down their stories." She paused, watching him arrange ingredients. "What are you making?" "Your mom's carne guisada, with rice and beans." The mention of Maria brought a moment of comfortable silence, not the sharp pain of earlier, but something softer, a shared memory that connected them across time and loss. As Noah cooked, the twins drifted into the rhythm they'd developed over the past 8 months. Leo set up his laptop on the bed, working on some programming project that Noah didn't fully understand, but was proud of anyway. Sophie read aloud in Spanish, her voice carrying the musical cadence she'd inherited from her grandmother. The smell of cumin and garlic began to fill the small room, and for a moment Noah could almost pretend they were back in the house on Maple Street. Almost pretend that Maria would walk through the door any moment, bringing her laughter and the scent of the marigolds she loved. But the illusion shattered when Leo's stomach growled audibly, and Sophie closed her book with a sigh that sounded too old for her 15 years. "Dad," Leo said carefully, "I've been thinking about the summer job at the hardware store. Mr. Rodriguez said I could start next week if I want." Noah's hand stilled on the wooden spoon. Leo was smart, brilliant even, with a gift for technology that could take him anywhere he wanted to go. But he was also 15, and 15-year-olds shouldn't have to work to help their families survive. "We'll talk about it," Noah said finally. "But Dad, we'll talk about it." The conversation died there, but Noah could feel the weight of unspoken words. Leo understood the math as well as his father did. Sophie understood it too, though she expressed it differently in the way she'd stopped mentioning the art supplies she needed, the way she'd started looking at community college brochures instead of university catalogs. After dinner, Noah sat on the concrete walkway outside their room, watching the sun set over the desert. The heat was finally beginning to break, and a slight breeze carried the scent of sage and dust. In the distance, he could hear the hum of traffic on the interstate, people heading somewhere else, somewhere better. It was then that he noticed the food truck again, sitting in the lot behind Murphy's gas station. The setting sun caught its aluminum sides, and for a moment, it almost looked like it was glowing. Noah had heard all the stories how it had been there for 20 years, how everyone who tried to make it work ended up bankrupt or worse. But looking at it now, he saw something different. He saw Maria's recipe journal, tucked away in his dresser drawer, filled with her careful handwriting, her mother's recipes, her grandmother's secrets. Dishes that bridged cultures and generations, that turned simple ingredients into something magical. He saw possibility. The next morning, Noah woke before the alarm again. But this time, instead of staring at the ceiling, he found himself thinking about flavors and spices, about the way Maria's hands had moved when she cooked, about the joy on people's faces when they tasted something that reminded them of home. He thought about the food truck, sitting abandoned in the lot behind Murphy's gas station. He thought about $50 more rent and college applications and the look in his children's eyes when they tried to pretend they weren't hungry. And for the first time in months, Noah Alvarez allowed himself to hope. Noah's hands trembled as he counted out the crumpled bills on Murphy's counter. $347 everything he'd saved over the past 2 months by skipping lunch and walking to work instead of driving. Old Murphy, the gas station owner, watched with rheumy eyes that had seen too many desperate transactions. "You sure about this, son?" Murphy's voice carried the weight of years and regret. "That truck's been nothing but trouble for anyone who's tried." "Tell me about it," Noah said, his voice steadier than he felt. Murphy's weathered fingers drummed against the counter. "Belonged to some chef back in the day, Domingo something, real talented, from what I heard. Made food that brought people from 3 counties over. Then, one day, just vanished. Left the truck and never came back. That was maybe 20 years ago. What happened to him? Nobody knows. Some say he got mixed up with the wrong people, owed money he couldn't pay. Others think he just got tired of the grind and moved on. But that truck, Murphy shook his head. Every few years, someone gets the same idea you got, thinks they can make it work, never does. Noah pushed the money forward. Maybe they weren't trying hard enough. Outside, Sophie and Leo stood beside the food truck, their faces skeptical but curious. Noah had told them about his plan that morning, over breakfast instant oatmeal and the last of the milk. Leo had immediately started asking questions about permits and health codes and profit margins. Sophie had simply nodded, the way she did when she was processing something too big for immediate judgment. The truck looked worse up close than it had from a distance. The white paint had faded to the color of old bones, and someone had covered the sides with graffitino, the artistic kind, but the desperate scratches of people marking their territory. The back doors hung open, revealing an interior that smelled of grease and disappointment. "It's bigger than I thought," Leo said, stepping up into the service area. His voice echoed in the empty space. "Look at this," Sophie called from the driver's area. She was holding up a stack of papers she'd found wedged behind the visor. Registration papers. The truck was originally registered to Domingo Reyes. Noah took the yellowed documents, squinting at the faded ink. The truck had been built in 1987, originally painted white with blue trim. There was an address listed somewhere in Tucson and a business license for Reyes Roadside Kitchen. Reyes, Noah murmured. The name felt familiar somehow, like a song he'd heard, but couldn't quite remember. They spent the rest of Saturday exploring their purchase. The propane system needed work, and the generator barely turned over. The refrigeration unit was dead, and someone had removed most of the cooking equipment years ago. But the structure was solid, and Noah could see past the damage to the potential underneath. "We'll need a new grill," Leo said, consulting something on his phone, "and a fryer, and a prep station, and—" "One thing at a time, my Joe," Noah interrupted gently. "First we get it running, then we worry about equipment." That evening, Noah sat on the motel room floor with Maria's recipe journal open in his lap. The leather cover was soft from years of handling, and the pages fell open naturally to the recipes Maria had made most often. Her handwriting filled the margins with notes and modifications: a dash more cumin here, a squeeze of lime there, the secret ingredient that made everything taste like love. He found what he was looking for on page 47, her grandmother's carne asada marinade, written in a mixture of Spanish and English that captured the rhythm of border cooking. Below it, in Maria's careful script, was a note: "Para tacos que saben a casa," for tacos that taste like home. "Dad?" Sophie's voice was soft, careful. "Are you really going to do this?" Noah looked up to find both twins watching him. Leo was cross-legged on his bed, his laptop open but forgotten. Sophie sat in the chair, her current book closed in her lap. "I think so," Noah said. "What do you think?" "I think Mom would have loved it," Sophie said simply. Leo was more practical. "Do you know anything about running a food truck?" "No," Noah admitted, "but I know how to cook, and I know how to work hard. The failure rate for restaurant businesses is like 80% in the first year," Leo said, but his tone wasn't discouraging, just analytical. "But food trucks have lower overhead, and if we can build a social media presence—" "You've been researching this," Noah realized. Leo grinned, the first real smile Noah had seen from him in weeks. "Maybe a little. Did you know there's a whole community of food truck owners online? They share tips and recipes and warn each other about bad events and difficult customers." Over the next 3 weeks, Noah threw himself into the truck with an intensity that surprised even him. He worked his regular construction job during the day, then spent his evenings in the lot behind Murphy's, cleaning and repairing, and slowly bringing the old truck back to life. Jimmy Santos helped him rebuild the propane system, trading his expertise for the promise of free lunches once the truck was running. Mrs. Rodriguez from the motel brought over cleaning supplies and didn't ask for payment. Even Murphy pitched in, letting Noah use his tools and offering advice from his own days, running the gas station's lunch counter. The twins became his most dedicated helpers. Leo researched permits and health codes with the same intensity he brought to his programming projects. He created spreadsheets tracking their expenses and projected revenues, and started following food bloggers and Instagram accounts to learn about marketing. Sophie took charge of the truck's appearance. She scrubbed away years of grime and graffiti, revealing patches of the original blue trim underneath the faded white paint. In the supply compartments, she found remnants of the truck's past-old menus, faded photographs, and a coffee-stained notebook filled with recipes in a handwriting that wasn't Maria's. "Look at this," she said one evening, showing Noah the notebook. "I think it belonged to the original owner, Domingo Reyes." The recipes were written in Spanish, with notes in English scattered throughout. Some were familiar basic preparations for carne asada and carnitas. But others were more unusual, fusion dishes that combined Mexican techniques with flavors Noah didn't recognize. "Adobo birria with pickled vegetables," Sophie read aloud. "Lumpia Shanghai tacos with cilantro lime crema. Sisig fried rice with jalapeno aioli." "Filipino," Noah said, recognition dawning. "Some of these are Filipino dishes." "You think this Domingo guy was Filipino?" "Maybe. Or maybe he cooked with someone who was." Noah thought of Maria's own recipe journal, how it blended her Mexican heritage with techniques she'd learned from friends and neighbors, how food had a way of crossing borders and building bridges. They found their first customer by accident. Noah was testing the rebuilt grill, cooking a small batch of carne asada for the family's dinner, when a man walked by and stopped at the window. "That smells incredible," the man said. He was wearing a utility company uniform, probably on his way home from work. "You guys open?" "Not officially," Noah said. "Just testing the equipment." "I'll pay you for a taco. Been driving past this truck for years. Always wondered what it would be like if someone got it running again." Noah looked at the meat sizzling on the grill, at the tortillas warming on the side burner, at his children watching expectantly. He thought about Murphy's stories and the notebook full of fusion recipes and the way hope felt like a knot in his chest. $5, he said. The man handed over a crumpled bill and waited while Noah assembled the taco-warm tortilla, perfectly seasoned meat, a sprinkle of white onion and cilantro, a squeeze of lime. The first bite brought a look of genuine surprise to the man's face. "Holy shit," he said, then immediately apologized. "Sorry, but this is really good, like really good." He was back the next day with 3 co-workers. Word spread the way it does in small towns through utility crews and construction workers and the network of people who knew what real food tasted like. Within a week, Noah was selling 40 tacos a day out of the window of a truck that was supposed to be cursed. But success brought its own problems. On a Thursday evening, as Noah was cleaning the grill, a man in an expensive suit appeared at the window. He looked out of place in the dusty lot behind Murphy's, like he'd stepped out of a different world entirely. "Mr. Alvarez?" The man's smile was sharp and professional. "My name is Marcus Webb. I represent the financial institution that holds the original liens on this vehicle." Noah's stomach dropped. "I bought this truck from Murphy, fair and square." "Oh, I'm sure you did. But I'm afraid Mr. Murphy didn't have clear title to sell. The previous owner, Mr. Reyes, defaulted on several loans before he abandoned the vehicle. Those debts transfer with ownership." Webb handed Noah a manila envelope. "You'll find all the documentation inside. The total amount owed is $47,800, with interest and fees, of course. We're prepared to be reasonable about a payment plan, but we'll need to see some good faith, say $5,000, within the next 60 days. The envelope felt like it weighed 100 pounds. "And if I can't pay? Then we'll have to repossess the truck and recover our losses through other means." Webb's smile never wavered. "I'm sure you understand. It's just business." After Webb left, Noah sat in the truck's driver's seat, staring at the papers. The legal language was dense and threatening, full of clauses and conditions that seemed designed to trap rather than inform. But the numbers were clear enough. $47,800, more money than Noah had ever seen in one place. Sophie found him there an hour later, still holding the envelope. "Dad, what's wrong?" Noah showed her the papers, watched her face change as she read. When she was finished, she sat beside him on the narrow bench seat. "So, what do we do?" she asked. "I don't know, Mija. I honestly don't know." They sat in silence as the sun set over Sierra Mesa, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. In the distance, Noah could hear the sounds of evening cars heading home, children playing, the ordinary rhythm of life continuing, despite the crisis that had just landed in his lap. "Maybe we fight," Sophie said finally. "Maybe we find a way." Noah looked at his daughter, 15 years old, and already wiser than he felt, and realized that giving up wasn't really an option. Not with everything they'd already invested. Not with the taste of success still fresh in his mouth. "Maybe we do," he agreed. The morning after Webb's visit, Noah woke with the determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. The legal papers sat on the small table like a challenge, but for the first time in months, Noah felt something other than fear when he looked at an impossible situation. He felt anger, and anger could be useful. "We're going to figure this out," he told the twins over breakfast, "but we need to be smart about it." Leo was already 3 steps ahead, his laptop open to a forum called Food Truck Warriors. The screen was filled with threads about permits, insurance, and legal issues. "There's a guy in Phoenix who had a similar problem with hidden liens. He found a lawyer who specializes in predatory lending practices. Lawyers cost money we don't have," Noah pointed out. "Not all of them. There's something called pro bono work, and there are legal aid societies. Besides," Leo's fingers flew across the keyboard, "I think we need to focus on growing the business first. Build up cash flow, establish customer base, document everything. Make ourselves too valuable to shut down." Sophie looked up from her sketchbook, where she'd been designing new signage for the truck. "What if we make them famous too? Like, what if shutting us down makes them look like the bad guys?" Noah smiled despite the circumstances. His children had inherited Maria's fierce optimism along with her stubborn streak. "What did you have in mind?" "Social media," Leo said immediately. "Food trucks that go viral get protection from their communities. People rally around underdogs, especially if there's a good story." That afternoon, Noah found himself doing something he'd never imagined, posing for his son's phone camera while he prepared carne asada. Leo had insisted on documenting the process, from the marinade to the final assembly. "Talk about what you're doing," Leo coached from behind the camera. "Tell people about Mom's recipes." "I feel ridiculous," Noah muttered, but he continued working. "This is my late wife's grandmother's marinade. The secret is the balance. The lime juice tenderizes the meat, but you need the orange juice for sweetness and the garlic and cumin for depth." Leo stopped recording. "That was perfect. Natural, personal, but also informative. Now do one where you're actually making the tacos." Over the next week, Leo created a series of short videos featuring Noah's cooking process. The quality was amateur shot, on a cracked phone, with the truck's generator humming in the background, but there was something authentic about the footage that polished productions couldn't capture. "What should we call it?" Leo asked, uploading the first video to Instagram. "Call what?" "The account, the brand. We need a name for what we're doing." Noah thought about it while he prepped vegetables for the evening rush. They'd been getting steadier customers, construction workers, office staff from the insurance agency downtown, even a few families who drove over from the residential neighborhoods. Word was spreading the old-fashioned way, through satisfied stomachs and genuine recommendations. "Root Revival," Sophie suggested. She was lettering a new menu board, her artistic hand turning simple chalk into something that looked professional. Like, "We're reviving the truck's root, but also helping people find their way back to real food." "I like it," Noah said. "Root Revival it is." The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon, in late October. Noah was experimenting with one of the fusion recipes from Domingo Reyes's Notebooker, Filipino-Mexican combination that paired ube, purple yam, with traditional queso in a taco that shouldn't have worked. Absolutely did. The purple-flecked filling was creamy and slightly sweet, offset by the sharpness of pickled onions and the heat of jalapeno crema. Leo was filming the assembly process when something magical happened. The tortilla, hand-pressed and still warm from the comal, seemed to glow in the afternoon light. The purple filling created a striking visual contrast, and when Noah added the final tucheza sprinkle of cotija cheese, a few cilantro leaves, a careful drizzle of crema, the finished taco looked like art. "Dude," Leo breathed, still recording. "That's beautiful." "Language," Noah said automatically, but he was smiling. The taco did look beautiful, and more importantly, it tasted like a perfect fusion of two cultures that had found common ground in his hands. Leo posted the video that evening with the caption, "When Dad turns purple yam into taco magic. Food truck dad. Ube tacos. Root revival, Sierra Mesa." They went to bed that night with 17 likes and 3 comments. Noah woke up the next morning to find his phone buzzing constantly with notifications. The video had been shared and reshared, picking up momentum as it spread across platforms. Food bloggers were reposting it, local news stations were reaching out, and suddenly Food Truck Dad was trending in the Southwest. "We have a problem," Leo announced, staring at his laptop screen. "A good problem, but still a problem." The line outside the truck stretched around the block. Cars with license plates from 3 different states were parked along Main Street, and Noah could see people taking selfies in front of the truck's hand-painted signage. "How many ube tacos can we make?" Sophie asked, surveying the crowd. Not enough, Noah realized. They'd planned for their usual 40 customers, maybe 50 on a busy day, but there had to be 200 people waiting and more arriving every minute. Noah took a deep breath and stepped up to the window. "Folks," he called out, his voice carrying across the lot. "First, thank you all for coming out. This is incredible, and my family and I are grateful for your support." A cheer went up from the crowd, and someone shouted, "We love you, Food Truck Dad." "Here's the thing," Noah continued. "We're a small operation, and we want to make sure everyone gets quality food. We're going to serve until we run out of ingredients, and then we're going to take orders for tomorrow. If you can't get served today, come back tomorrow, and we'll make sure you get the first tacos off the grill." Instead of complaints, Noah heard applause. A woman near the front of the line called out, "That's what real food service looks like," and others nodded in agreement. They sold out in 3 hours. Every tortilla, every ounce of meat, every container of salsa and crema. When the last customer walked away with a satisfied smile, Noah felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the pure satisfaction of work well done. "Dad," Leo said, showing him the phone, "we need to talk." The notifications were overwhelming. Food Network wanted to feature them in an upcoming segment. A morning show in Phoenix wanted to book an interview. 3 different food magazines had reached out about photo shoots. But it was the email from Harper Quinn that caught Noah's attention. She identified herself as a podcaster and journalist who specialized in stories about small business entrepreneurs. She was working on a series about food truck culture in the Southwest, and she'd like to interview Noah about his journey. "She's legitimate," Leo said, pulling up her credentials on his laptop. "Her podcast has like 500,000 subscribers, and she's written for some major publications. This could be huge for us." Noah read Harper's email again. Her tone was professional but warm, and she seemed genuinely interested in the human story behind the viral video. More importantly, she wasn't asking for anything other than a conversation. "Set it up," Noah decided. "But here at the truck, if she wants to tell our story, she should see where it's happening." Harper Quinn arrived the next morning in a dusty Honda Civic with California plates and a back seat full of recording equipment. She was younger than Noah, had expected maybe early 30s with, the kind of practical beauty that suggested she was more interested in stories than appearances. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine, and she spent the first 10 minutes asking about the twins' roles in the business rather than launching into interview questions. "So this is the famous truck," she said, examining the exterior with a journalist's eye for detail. "It's got character. How long have you been running it?" "About 2 months," Noah said. "Feels like longer." "And before that?" "Construction work. 3 different jobs after the food processing plant closed." He found himself relaxing as Harper listened without judgment, her questions drawing out details he hadn't planned to share. "What made you think a food truck was the answer?" Noah paused, considering. "Desperation mostly, but also hope. I had my wife's recipes, and I had kids who needed to see that giving up wasn't an option." Harper's follow-up questions were thoughtful, focused on the emotional journey rather than just the business aspects. She asked about Maria's influence on the menu, about the twins' contributions, about the challenge of starting over in middle age. When Noah mentioned the legal troubles with the hidden liens, her expression sharpened with interest. "That's unfortunately common in this industry," she said. "Predatory lenders target food trucks because they're seen as high-risk ventures with valuable collateral. Have you been able to find legal help?" "We're working on it," Noah said carefully. "There might be other options. I've covered similar cases where community support and media attention created enough pressure to force more reasonable settlements." Harper leaned forward slightly. "Would you be open to me digging deeper into this, not as an exposé, but as part of the larger story about what it takes to make small businesses work in America?" Noah exchanged glances with the twins, who had been listening from the truck's service window. Leo nodded enthusiastically, while Sophie's expression was more cautious but supportive. "What would that involve?" Noah asked. "Research into the lending company, interviews with other food truck owners who faced similar challenges, maybe some conversations with legal experts who work on these cases." Harper pulled out a business card. "I can't promise anything, but sometimes sunlight is the best disinfectant for shady business practices." That evening, as Noah cleaned the grill and the twins counted the day's receipts, he felt something he hadn't experienced since Maria's death, the sense that he wasn't facing the future alone. Between Leo's social media savvy, Sophie's artistic vision, and Harper's journalistic connections, they were building something larger than just a food truck business. They were building a community. Success, Noah discovered, came with its own set of problems. Within 2 weeks of Leo's viral video, Root Revival had attracted attention Noah never wanted. The first sign of trouble arrived in the form of a cease and desist letter delivered by a courier who looked apologetic about the whole thing. "Fusion Fresh Express," Noah read aloud, examining the letterhead. "Corporate headquarters in Dallas." Leo pulled up their website on his laptop. "They're a fast, casual chain. Looks like they have about 200 locations across the Southwest. And look at this." He pointed to their menu. Korean, Mexican fusion bowls, Filipino, inspired tacos, Vietnamese banh mi burritos. "They're claiming we stole their concept," Sophie said, reading over Noah's shoulder. "Specifically, they're saying the ube taco infringes on their trademarked Purple Paradise Bowl." Noah studied the legal document, feeling the familiar weight of impossible circumstances settling on his shoulders. The language was dense and threatening, full of references to intellectual property violations and demands for immediate cessation of sales. "Can they do this?" he asked. "Probably not legally," Leo said, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he researched. "You can't trademark a flavor combination, and fusion cooking has been around forever. But they can tie us up in legal battles that cost more than we can afford." The irony wasn't lost on Noah. He'd learned to cook fusion dishes from Domingo Reyes's notebook, recipes that predated Fusion Fresh Express by decades. But proving that would require lawyers and court fees and time they didn't have. The second blow came that same afternoon. Marcus Webb appeared at the truck's window during the lunch rush, his expensive suit looking even more out of place now that Root Revival had become a local gathering spot. "Mr. Alvarez," Webb said, his smile as sharp as ever, "I see business is booming. That's wonderful news for our repayment schedule." Noah continued assembling tacos while they talked, partly because the customers were waiting and partly because he needed something to do with his hands. "We're working on it." "I'm sure you are, but I'm afraid we've had to accelerate our timeline. New company policy high, visibility cases get priority attention. We'll need that good faith payment of $5,000 within 30 days now, not 60. A customer near the window overhead and stepped closer. "Is this guy bothering you, Noah?" Webb's smile faltered slightly. "This is a private business matter." "Nothing private about standing at a man's place of business and making threats," the customer said. He was a big guy, probably worked construction, and his voice carried the authority of someone used to handling problems. "Maybe you should take this conversation somewhere else." Other customers began to gather, forming a loose semicircle around Webb. Their expressions ranged from curious to hostile, but all of them were clearly on Noah's side. "Of course," Webb said, backing away from the window. "Mr. Alvarez, we'll be in touch about scheduling a more private meeting." After Webb left, the construction worker leaned against the counter. "Who was that clown?" "Someone trying to take the truck away," Noah said simply. "Like hell." The man pulled out his wallet and dropped a $20 bill in the tip jar. "Keep fighting, food truck dad. This town needs more guys like you and fewer guys like him." Word of the confrontation spread quickly through social media and Harper Quinn's growing network of followers. By evening, Save Route Revival was trending locally, and Noah's phone was buzzing with messages of support from customers, fellow food truck owners, and complete strangers who had heard about their situation. Harper arrived the next morning with coffee and a legal pad full of notes. "I've been doing some research on consolidated lending solutions," she said, settling at one of the picnic tables Leo had set up beside the truck. "They're interesting." "Interesting how?" "They specialize in acquiring defaulted loans from failed businesses, then pursuing aggressive collection strategies. But here's the thing, in at least 6 cases I found, they've been forced to settle for significantly less than the claimed amount after borrowers fought back with legal representation." Noah poured himself coffee from the truck's machine. "I keep hearing about legal representation, but lawyers cost money, and—" "Not always." Harper pulled a business card from her notebook. "There's a legal aid clinic in Phoenix that handles predatory lending cases. I spoke with one of their attorneys yesterday. She's willing to review your case pro bono if you're interested." The card read, "Southwest Consumer Protection Project," with a Phoenix address and phone number. Noah stared at it, feeling something that might have been hope stirring in his chest. "What's the catch?" "No catch, exactly. But they do prioritize cases that have the potential for broader impact. Your situation with the viral video and community support could help establish precedent for other small business owners facing similar problems." That afternoon, Noah found himself on the phone with Patricia Morales, a soft-spoken attorney who specialized in consumer protection law. She listened to his story without interruption, asking pointed questions about the original loan documents and Webb's behavior. "From what you're describing, there are several potential issues with their claim," she said finally. "Hidden liens that weren't disclosed at the time of sale, possible violations of fair debt collection practices, and questions about whether the original loans were even legitimate. I'd like to review all the documentation you have, and this won't cost anything. Not unless we recover money for you. Then we take a percentage of any settlement or judgment. But Mr. Alvarez, I want to be clear fighting. These cases takes time, and there are no guarantees. The process can be stressful, and sometimes the other side escalates their tactics before they back down." Noah looked out the truck's window at the line of customers forming for the afternoon rush. Leo was taking orders with the efficiency of someone twice his age, while Sophie managed the register and chatted with regulars who had become friends. In 2 months, they'd built something real, not just a business, but a community gathering place. "I understand," he told Patricia. "When do we start?" The escalation came sooner than anyone expected. On a busy Friday afternoon, while Noah was prepping for the weekend festival crowd, a city inspector appeared with a clipboard and an official-looking badge. "Health and safety inspection," the man announced. "Routine check." But it wasn't routine. For the next 2 hours, Inspector Williams, a thin man with the demeanor of someone who enjoyed finding problems, went through the truck with forensic intensity. He measured temperatures, examined equipment, scrutinized permits, and took photographs of every surface. "Violation," he announced, pointing to the hand-washing station. "Water temperature is 2 degrees below regulation." "That's within the margin of error for the thermometer," Leo protested, but Williams was already writing on his citation pad. "Violation. Food storage containers don't have proper labeling dates." "Those are today's prep containers," Sophie said. "We made everything this morning." "Regulation requires preparation dates on all containers, regardless of when they were prepared." The violations mounted: a loose screw on the service window, a water stain on the ceiling that Williams claimed indicated potential mold, a propane connection that was inadequately secured, despite having passed inspection the previous month. "I'm afraid I'll have to shut you down pending remediation of these violations," Williams said, attaching a red closure notice to the truck's door. "You can apply for re-inspection once all issues have been addressed." The gathered crowd of customers erupted in protests, but Williams was unmoved. "This is a matter of public safety," he insisted, though his eyes avoided Noah's face as he spoke. That evening, Harper helped Noah research Inspector Williams's history. What they found was telling. In the past 2 years, Williams had issued closure orders to 12 small food businesses, but only 2 large chain restaurants. Of the small businesses, 8 had been forced to close permanently due to the cost of addressing violations and the lost revenue during closure. "This is harassment," Harper said, her journalistic objectivity giving way to genuine anger. "And I'm going to prove it." The story Harper published the next morning was devastating in its precision. She laid out the pattern of Williams's inspections, documented the suspicious timing of his visit to Root Revival, and included quotes from other food truck owners who had faced similar treatment. The piece was picked up by the Phoenix newspaper and shared thousands of times on social media. By noon, Williams's supervisor had called to apologize and schedule an immediate re-inspection. By evening, Root Revival was back in business with a spotless health certificate and a crowd of supporters who had been following the story online. But the real victory came in the mail 3 days later. A letter from Fusion Fresh Express's legal department dropping their trademark claim and wishing Root Revival continued success in the competitive food service industry. They blinked, Patricia Morales explained over the phone. Harper's coverage made this too public for them to continue. Bad press about bullying a small business isn't worth the cost of a legal fight they probably couldn't win anyway. That night, as the family celebrated with takeout from their own truck, Noah reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. The viral video had brought customers and attention, but it had also brought challenges he'd never anticipated. Corporate lawyers, predatory lenders, corrupt inspectors, all the obstacles that kept small businesses from succeeding. But it had also brought something else, a community of people willing to fight for what was right. Harper's journalism, Patricia's legal expertise, the customers who stood up to Webb, the supporters who rallied around, Save Root Revival, all of them, had chosen to be part of something larger than themselves. "Dad," Sophie said, cleaning salsa off her fingers, "I've been thinking about college applications." Noah's chest tightened. They'd been so focused on the truck's immediate crises that he'd almost forgotten about Sophie's dreams of art school, about the scholarship applications that were due in just a few months. The art program at State University requires a portfolio of community-engaged work, she continued. "I want to submit designs for the truck, and maybe murals for other small businesses around town. Show how art can be part of economic development." Leo looked up from his laptop, where he'd been monitoring their social media accounts. "And I've been thinking about computer science programs that focus on small business applications. Maybe develop an app that helps food trucks coordinate locations and share resources." Noah felt tears prick his eyes. His children weren't just helping him build a business, they were building their futures on the foundation of what they'd created together. Outside, The desert wind rattled the motel windows, but inside room 237, Noah felt something he hadn't experienced since Maria's death, absolute certainty that everything was going to be all right. Harper's investigation into the truck's history began with a torn page she'd found wedged behind the driver's Seata fragment of what appeared to be a recipe ledger written in 2 languages. The handwriting was different from Domingo Reyes's notebook, more hurried, as if someone had been copying recipes under pressure. "Look at this," she said, spreading the fragment on the picnic table beside the truck. "It's only part of a page, but you can see where it was torn from a larger book. And these notes in the margin, they're in Tagalog." Noah studied the faded ink. The visible recipes were complex, calling for ingredients he'd never heard of, and techniques that seemed to bridge multiple culinary traditions. "You think this belonged to someone else? Maybe someone who worked with Reyes, a partner, or maybe just someone who was documenting his recipes." Harper pulled out her laptop. "I've been researching the truck's route history, trying to trace where it went during its active years. The registration shows it was licensed for interstate commerce, which means it could have traveled anywhere in the Southwest." Leo leaned over her shoulder, reading the screen. Food truck routes in the 80s and 90s were a lot less regulated than they are now. Drivers could basically go wherever they found customers. "Exactly, and look at this." Harper pointed to a scanned document on her screen. "I found a reference to a truck called Reyes Roadside Kitchen in a 1994 article about the Tucson Food Festival. It says Reyes won the competition 3 years, running with fusion dishes that told the story of America's borderlands." The article was brief, but it painted a picture of a chef who was ahead of his time. In an era when fusion cuisine was still experimental, Domingo Reyes had been combining Mexican and Filipino flavors in ways that celebrated both traditions without diminishing either. "There's something else," Harper said, clicking to another tab. "I found an old interview with a food critic from Phoenix. She remembered eating at the truck in the early 90s, said it was revolutionary, but that Reyes was secretive about his recipes. He apparently worked with a partnera, Filipino woman who handled the business side while he cooked." Noah felt a chill of recognition. Maria's grandmother was Filipino. She came to Arizona in the 60s, married a Mexican-American man she met at a church dance in Tucson. "You think there might be a connection?" "I don't know. But Maria used to tell stories about her grandmother's cooking, how she learned to make adobo and lumpia from a woman who ran a food stand near the university. She never mentioned the woman's name, but..." Noah trailed off, remembering something. "Wait here." He climbed into the truck and retrieved Maria's recipe journal from the safe where he kept it during business hours. Flipping through the pages, he found what he was looking for: a recipe for adobo birria, written in Maria's careful script, but with a note at the bottom. "From Tita Rosa's friend," the one with the truck. Tita Rosa was Maria's grandmother, Noah explained, showing Harper the page. "And look at this, the one with the truck. What if that friend was Domingo Reyes's partner?" Harper's eyes lit up with the excitement of a journalist who'd found the thread that would unravel a larger story. "We need to find out more about this partner. If she's still alive, she might know what happened to Reyes and where he went." The search led them to St. Augustine's Catholic Church in Tucson, where the parish records showed that Rosa Delgado had been married in 1963. The priest, Father Miguel, was elderly but sharp, and he remembered the Delgado family well. "Rosa was a wonderful woman," he said, sitting in his office surrounded by decades of community photographs. "She worked at the university cafeteria for 30 years, but she was always cooking for church events and family celebrations. And yes, she had a friend who ran a food truck. I remember because Rosa used to bring these amazing fusion dishes to our potluck dinners, things you couldn't find anywhere else in Tucson." "Do you remember the friend's name?" Harper asked. Father Miguel thought for a moment. Carmen Reyes. She was married to the chef Domingo, I think. They ran the truck together until..." He paused, his expression growing troubled. "There was some kind of problem. Money troubles maybe, or something with the authorities. They left town suddenly, in the middle of the night." Rosa was heartbroken. They'd been close friends for years. When was this? Oh, it must have been the mid-90s. I remember because it was around the time Rosa got sick. She died in 1997, and she was always sad that she never got to say goodbye to Carmen. Driving back to Sierra Mesa, Noah felt the weight of family history settling around him like a familiar coat. The recipes he'd been cooking weren't just fusion experiments. They were the legacy of friendships that had crossed cultural boundaries, of women who had found common ground in the language of food. So now we know, Harper said, her voice thoughtful. Domingo and Carmen Reyes disappeared, but not before Carmen shared recipes with Rosa Delgado. Those recipes made their way to Maria, and from Maria to you. The truck didn't just carry food, it carried stories. Back at Root Revival, Noah found the twins experimenting with a new menu item based on one of the fragmentary recipes they'd discovered. Leo was manning the grill while Sophie prepared a complex sauce that combined adobo flavors with Mexican chile peppers. "How's it going?" Noah asked, tasting the sauce from a spoon. "Complicated," Sophie admitted. "This recipe calls for tamarind paste, but it also wants Mexican oregano and something called calamansi. I'm trying to substitute lime juice, but it's not quite right." "Calamansi is a Filipino citrus," Harper said, joining them at the prep station. "It's smaller than a lime, more tart. There's a Filipino grocery store in Phoenix that might carry it." The next morning, Noah found himself in an unfamiliar part of Phoenix, standing in a store that smelled like fish sauce and incense. The owner, Mrs. Santos, was a tiny woman with sharp eyes who seemed skeptical about why a Mexican-American food truck owner needed Filipino ingredients. "Calamansi is very specific," she said, leading him to a refrigerated case. "Not like lime or lemon, more complex. What are you making?" Noah explained about the truck, about the recipes they'd found, about the connection between Carmen Reyes and his wife's grandmother. As he talked, Mrs. Santos's expression changed from skepticism to interest, to something approaching excitement. "Domingo and Carmen Reyes," she repeated. "I knew them. They used to come here in the early 90s, buying ingredients for their truck. Carmen was a lovely woman. She taught me how to make the best lumpia Shanghai I've ever tasted. But then they vanished, just disappeared one day. Do you know why?" Mrs. Santos glanced around the store, making sure they were alone. "There were rumors, something about debt collectors, maybe immigration problems. Carmen was undocumented, came here from the Philippines in the 80s. Domingo was trying to help her get legal status, but the process was complicated then, more complicated than now, even." She selected a bag of frozen calamansi from the freezer. "This is the real thing, imported from the Philippines. Use it sparingly. The flavor is intense. And here," she handed him a small jar of tamarind paste. "This is what Carmen used in her adobo. She said it was the secret to balancing sweet and sour." On the drive back to Sierra Mesa, Noah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Patricia Morales' number. "I have news about your case," she said without preamble. "Marcus Webb's company made a mistake, a big one." "What kind of mistake?" "They filed a lien claim without proper documentation. When I requested the original loan papers from the bank that supposedly issued them, the bank had no record of any loans to Domingo Reyes. Either the loans never existed, or Webb's company forged the documentation." Noah pulled into a gas station parking lot, needing to concentrate on what Patricia was telling him. "What does that mean?" "It means their entire claim is fraudulent. We can not only get them to drop the case, we can probably sue them for harassment and file complaints with state regulators. This could shut down their whole operation." That evening, as Noah experimented with the calamansi and tamarind paste in a new version of adobo birria, he reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. 6 months ago, he'd been a laid-off factory worker, struggling to keep his family housed. Now he was uncovering decades-old mysteries, fighting corporate fraud, and cooking recipes that connected him to people he'd never met, but somehow knew intimately. The adobo birria was extraordinarily complex and layered, with the tamarind adding a depth of flavor that transformed the familiar into something transcendent. When he served it to the twins, their expressions told him everything he needed to know. "This is it," Sophie said, closing her eyes as she savored the taste. "This is the dish that's going to win the Great Taste Throwdown." The Great Taste Throwdown was still months away, but Noah was already thinking about it. The State Fair's annual cooking competition drew contestants from across the Southwest, and the winner received 50, zero enough to pay off any legitimate debts and set up a proper commissary kitchen. More importantly, it would prove that Root Revival belonged in the same conversation as the established restaurants and food companies that usually dominated the competition. It would show that a struggling dad with a borrowed truck and his late wife's recipes could compete with anyone. But first, they had to survive the daily challenges of running a small business in a town that was still learning to believe in itself. And they had to solve the mystery of what had happened to Domingo and Carmen Reyes, just for the sake of the story, but because Noah was beginning to suspect that their fate was somehow connected to his own. The inside of the truck held more secrets than Noah had ever imagined. What started as routine cleaning revealed layers of history, written in graffiti, stickers, and carved initials. Behind the prep counter, someone had etched CR plus DR forever in careful script. Near the back door, a faded sticker read, Bayanahan Food Collective, Tucson 1993, and covering the entire back wall, barely visible under years of paint and grime, was a mural that told the story of American immigration through food. "Look at this," Sophie said, carefully scraping paint from the corner of the mural. "There's a whole scene here, people cooking, families eating together, recipes being passed down." Harper photographed each revelation as they uncovered it, documenting the truck's hidden history. "This isn't just graffiti," she said, examining the artwork through her camera lens. "This is a record of everyone who worked here, everyone who made this truck their livelihood." The mural was the work of several hands, painted in sections over what must have been years. Near the window, someone had painted a Filipino market scene vendors selling fresh fish and tropical fruits while customers bargained in a mixture of languages. In the center, a Mexican family gathered around a table loaded with tamales and mole, 3 generations sharing a meal and stories. But it was the final section, near the back door, that took Noah's breath away. A woman stood at a stove, her hands shaping something on a comal, while children watched from nearby chairs. The woman's face was turned away, but her posture was unmistakably familiar. In the background, barely visible, unless you knew what to look for, was the outline of a food truck. "That's her," Noah said quietly. "That's Carmen Reyes." The painting was signed in the corner. "Para la familia que viene, CR 1995, for the family that comes." She knew, Harper said, understanding immediately. Carmen knew they were leaving, and she left this as a message for whoever came after. Over the following weeks, as word spread about the mural discovery, Root Revival became more than a food truck. It became a pilgrimage site for people whose families had stories similar to the ones painted on the walls. Food truck owners drove in from Phoenix and Albuquerque to see the artwork and share their own tales of struggle and success. Maria Santos, who ran a taco truck in Tempe, spent an afternoon examining the Filipino market scene. "My grandmother used to tell me about markets like this in Cebu," she said. "She came here in the 70s with nothing but recipes and determination." An elderly man named Robert Chen studied the carved initials with tears in his eyes. "My parents ran a food truck in Los Angeles in the 80s, he explained to Noah. "They never made much money, but they fed 3 generations of immigrants who were working their way up. This could have been their truck." But the most emotional visit came from an unexpected source. Patricia Morales arrived one afternoon with a woman in her 70s, small and dignified, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold decades of stories. "Noah," Patricia said, "I'd like you to meet someone. This is Carmen Reyes." The world seemed to stop. Noah stared at the woman who had been a mystery for so long, who had vanished into legend and left only recipes and artwork behind. Carmen looked older than her years, but there was strength in her posture and warmth in her smile. "So you're the one," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that mixed Filipino musicality with southwestern directness. "The one who brought our truck back to life." "Mrs. Reyes, Carmen, I don't understand. We thought everyone said you and your husband had disappeared." Carmen's smile was sad, but not bitter. "We did, in a way. Domingo died 15 years ago. Heart attack. But I've been alive, just living quietly in Flagstaff, trying to stay invisible." She moved toward the truck slowly, reverently, like someone approaching a shrine. When she reached the mural, she placed her hand on the painted figure at the stove. "I painted this the night before we left," she said. "I knew we couldn't come back, but I wanted to leave something for the people who would come after us. I wanted them to know that this truck was built on dreams." "Why did you leave?" Harper asked gently. Carmen's expression hardened slightly. "The same reason you've been having trouble with debt collectors, except in our case the threats weren't just about money. Immigration enforcement was different in the 90s, more brutal, less predictable. When the loans started coming due and we couldn't pay, the lenders threatened to call immigration services. Domingo was a citizen, but I wasn't. We had to choose between the truck and staying together." She paused, looking around the lot where they'd built their dreams. "We chose each other, moved to Flagstaff, opened a small restaurant. Did well enough to get by, but we never forgot this place. Domingo always said he'd come back someday, make things right." "The spice ledger," Noah said suddenly. "Everyone talks about Domingo's missing recipes, the ones that were worth millions." Carmen laughed, a sound that mixed joy and irony. "The famous spice ledger. People have turned it into some kind of legend, haven't they? Secret recipes worth millions of dollars." She reached into her purse and pulled out a worn notebook, similar to the fragment they'd found, but complete. "Here it is, Domingo's complete recipe collection. Every fusion dish we ever created, every technique we developed." Noah stared at the notebook, hardly daring to touch it. "This is worth millions?" "The recipes are worthless," Carmen said matter-of-factly. "What's valuable is the story behind them, the community that grew up around them, the connections between cultures that they represent. You can't copyright the idea of putting adobo in a tacoit's just food, but you can build something lasting around the values that food represents." She handed the notebook to Noah. "This belongs to you now, not because the recipes are secret, but because you understand what Domingo and I were trying to do. You're building bridges between communities, creating space for people to share their stories. That's what this truck was always meant to be." That evening, Noah sat in the truck reading through Domingo's complete recipe collection. The dishes were sophisticated and thoughtful, but they weren't mystical secrets. They were the work of a talented chef who understood that fusion cooking wasn't about creating novelty, it was about finding common ground between different traditions. More importantly, they were documented proof that Carmen and Domingo had created their recipes years before companies like Fusion Fresh Express had even existed. With Patricia's help, they could establish prior art that would protect other small businesses from similar harassment. "There's something else," Carmen said, joining him in the truck. She'd been talking with Harper and the twins, sharing stories about the truck's early days. "The competition you're planning to enter, the Great Taste Throwdown at the State Fair. What about it?" "Domingo won that competition in 1995, the year before we had to leave. He never got to collect the prize money because we disappeared that night." Carmen reached into her purse again and pulled out a tarnished trophy, about 8 inches tall, with a figure of a chef holding a plate. $50,000. They held it for 3 years, waiting for him to claim it. When he didn't, they kept the trophy, but donated the money to charity. Noah examined the trophy. The engraving read, "Great Taste Throwdown Champion, 1995, Domingo Reyes, Reyes Roadside Kitchen." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because the current competition director is the same man who organized it 28 years ago, Bill Morrison. He's retired now, but he volunteers every year because he loves discovering new talent." Carmen smiled. And because he's been wondering for 3 decades what happened to Domingo Reyes. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together. The truck's history, the recipes, the community support, the legal victory over the fraudulent lender-everything was building towards something larger than Noah had ever imagined. But first, they had to prove they belonged in the same conversation as the state's top culinary talent. They had to show that a struggling father with a borrowed truck and his late wife's recipes could honor the legacy that Domingo and Carmen had built. "There's one more thing," Carmen said as she prepared to leave. "The secret ingredient that made Domingo's adobo birria special. It's not in any of the recipes, because he never wrote it down." "What is it?" Carmen smiled, and for a moment, Noah could see the young woman who had painted murals and built dreams with her husband. Faith. Faith that the right person would come along and continue the story. Faith that food could bring people together across any divide. Faith that immigrants and dreamers and struggling families deserved a place at America's table. She patted his shoulder gently. "You already have that ingredient, Noah. You've had it all along." The championship trophy sat on Noah's dresser like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. But the path to the Great Taste Throwdown had become more complicated than anyone expected. 3 days after Carmen's visit, Marcus Webb returned, with reinforcements, 2 men in suits who looked like they meant business, and a court order that made Noah's blood run cold. "Asset seizure authorization," Webb announced, handing Noah the legal papers. "I'm afraid your attorney's complaints about fraudulent documentation have been reviewed and dismissed. Our loans are legitimate, and this vehicle is collateral for outstanding debts." Patricia had warned Noah that Webb's company might escalate before backing down, but seeing the tow truck positioned at the entrance to Murphy's lot made the threat real in a way that legal papers couldn't. "You can't do this," Leo protested, stepping between the men and the truck. "We have customers coming. People are depending on us." "I'm sorry, son," Webb said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Business is business. Your father can apply to reclaim the vehicle once the outstanding debt is satisfied." Noah looked at the court order, feeling the familiar weight of impossible circumstances. The document looked official, bore the stamp of the county courthouse, and gave Webb's company broad authority to seize assets pending debt resolution. "How long do we have?" Noah asked. "You can finish today's service, but the vehicle needs to be turned over by close of business. We'll be back at 6 p.m. After Webb and his associates left, Noah stood in the truck, feeling like the walls were closing in. Everything they'd built, every connection they'd made, every recipe they'd perfected it could all be gone by evening. "Dad," Sophie said quietly, "what are we going to do?" Before Noah could answer, Harper appeared at the window, her face flushed with excitement and anger. "I just got off the phone with Patricia. That court order is fake." "What do you mean fake?" "I mean Webb's company forged it. Patricia checked with the courthousino. Such order was issued. It's a federal crime to impersonate court authority." Harper held up her phone. "I've got the courthouse clerk on record saying they have no record of any case involving Root Revival or Consolidated Lending Solutions." Noah felt relief and rage warring in his chest. "So we call the police?" "Already did. They're on their way. But here's the thing, Webb probably knows the order is fake. He's counting on you not having the resources to check, or being too intimidated to fight back. This is his Hail Mary play, before his whole operation gets shut down." The police arrived 20 minutes later, just as Webb's tow truck was positioning itself behind the food truck. Officer Martinez, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, examined the court order with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every kind of scam. "This is definitely fraudulent," he confirmed. "The case number doesn't exist, the judge's signature is forged, and the court's seal is wrong. Mr. Webb, you're under arrest for fraud and impersonation of court authority." Webb's composure finally cracked as Martinez handcuffed him. "This is just a misunderstanding," he protested, "a clerical error." "Save it for your lawyer," Martinez replied. "Mr. Alvarez, you'll need to file a formal complaint, but your truck isn't going anywhere." As Webb was led away in the police car, Noah felt something he hadn't experienced in months: absolute vindication. But the celebration was short-lived. Harper was staring at her phone with an expression of concern. "What's wrong?" Noah asked. "I just got a call from Bill Morrison, the director of the Great Taste Throwdown. Someone filed a complaint claiming that Root Revival is using stolen recipes and shouldn't be allowed to compete." Noah's stomach dropped. "Who filed the complaint?" He wouldn't say, but he's requiring all contestants to provide documentation proving the originality of their recipes. If we can't prove that our fusion dishes are legitimately ours, we're disqualified. The irony was bitter. They'd just proven that their truck was legitimately theirs, but now someone was challenging their right to the recipes that made their food special. "Can we prove it?" Sophie asked. "I mean, we have Domingo's notebook, and we know Carmen gave us permission to use the recipes." "It's not that simple," Harper said. "Recipe ownership is complicated. Even if Domingo created the original fusion concepts, anyone could argue that they've developed similar dishes independently. Without concrete proof that our specific recipes predate any competing claims." Noah thought about the dozens of food trucks and restaurants that served fusion dishes across the Southwest. Any one of them could claim that adobo birria or ube tacos were their original creation. Proving priority would require documentation that most food truck operators simply didn't keep. "Wait," Leo said suddenly. "What about the mural? The one Carmen painted in 1995. If she documented the recipes in the artwork, that would establish the date." They rushed back to the truck, where Carmen's mural was still partially hidden under layers of paint and grime. Working carefully, they began to clean the section near the painted figure at the stove. As the years of accumulated damage fell away, details emerged that they'd missed before. The woman in the painting wasn't just cooking, she was teaching. Around her, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, were recipe notes written in a mixture of Spanish, English, and Tagalog. Ingredient lists, cooking times, technique descriptions, all painted into the background of the scene. "This is incredible," Harper breathed, photographing each revealed detail. "It's like a cookbook, hidden in plain sight." But the real discovery came when Sophie uncovered the corner where the painting met the truck's original aluminum siding. There, protected by layers of paint, was something that made Noah's heart race. A series of photographs, carefully sealed in plastic and hidden behind the mural. The photos showed the truck in its heyday, Carmen and Domingo, working side by side, customers lined up around the block, newspaper clippings about their competition victories. But more importantly, they showed dated evidence of every recipe that Root Revival was now serving. One photo, dated July 15, 1994, showed Domingo holding a plate that contained exactly the adobo birria taco that had become Noah's signature dish. Another, from September 1995, featured Carmen demonstrating the ube taco preparation to a group of culinary students from the University of Arizona. Carmen knew, Noah realized. She knew that someday someone would need proof that these recipes belonged to the truck. She hid the evidence where only someone who truly cared about the truck's history would find it. Armed with the photographic evidence and Carmen's testimony, Patricia Morales was able to establish a clear chain of ownership for the recipes. More importantly, she filed copyright claims that protected the specific fusion techniques and presentations that made Root Revival unique. But the real victory came when Bill Morrison called back the next evening. "I've reviewed your documentation," he said, his voice warm with approval. "Not only are you cleared to compete, but I have to tell you, I remember Domingo Reyes. He was one of the most talented chefs I've ever encountered. If you're carrying on his tradition, the other contestants better bring their A-game." That night, as Noah cleaned the grill and prepared for the next day's service, he reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. They'd defeated fraudulent lenders, uncovered the truck's hidden history, and secured their right to compete in the state's most prestigious cooking competition. But more importantly, they'd proven that a struggling family with nothing but determination and community support could stand up to corporate intimidation and bureaucratic harassment. They'd shown that small businesses weren't helpless victims, they were forces for positive change when they refused to back down. The Great Taste Throwdown was still 2 months away, but Noah was already thinking about the dish he would prepare. It wouldn't be enough to simply cook Domingo's recipe. She needed to create something that honored the past while looking toward the future. Something that told the story of every immigrant family that had used food to build a better life in America. Something that proved that the American dream was still alive, still possible, still worth fighting for. As he locked up the truck for the night, Noah noticed a new piece of graffiti near the back door. Someone had written, in careful script, "Thank you for keeping the dream alive." He didn't know who had left the message, but he understood its meaning. Root Revival wasn't just his story anymore. It was part of a larger narrative about resilience and hope that connected every person who had ever taken a chance on an impossible dream. And for the first time since Maria's death, Noah felt ready to write the next chapter. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning, while Noah was prepping vegetables for the lunch rush. Bill Morrison's voice carried an urgency that made Noah's chest tighten with anticipation. "I have good news and complicated news," Morrison said without preamble. "The good news is that your application for the Great Taste Throwdown has been approved, and you're officially in the competition. The complicated news is that we've had some changes to the format this year." Noah set down his knife, giving Morrison his full attention. "What kind of changes?" "Corporate sponsorship has increased dramatically, which means the prize money has jumped to $100,000. But it also means we're dealing with some very serious contestants, restaurant chains, celebrity chef teams, culinary school programs with 6-figure budgets." The prize money was double what Noah had expected. Enough to not just save the truck, but establish a real commissary kitchen, and maybe even help with the twins' college expenses. But the competition would be unlike anything he'd prepared for. "There's something else," Morrison continued. "The format this year is elimination-based. 3 rounds over 3 days, with contestants eliminated after each round. Only the final 3 compete for the grand prize." After hanging up, Noah stared at the truck's cramped prep area and tried to imagine competing against teams with professional equipment and unlimited budgets. Root Revival had grown beyond his wildest expectations, but they were still essentially a family operation running out of a 35-year-old truck. "We need a plan," Leo announced that evening, his laptop open to a spreadsheet that mapped out every aspect of the competition. "Not just what we're cooking, but how we're cooking it, how we're presenting it, how we're telling our story." The twins had thrown themselves into competition preparation with the intensity of military strategists. Sophie had created detailed drawings of their presentation setup, while Leo had researched every previous winner and analyzed the judges' preferences. "The judges change every year," Leo explained, "but they always include at least one James Beard Award winner, one Food Network personality, and one local restaurant owner. They judge on taste, presentation, innovation, and something called cultural authenticity." "What does cultural authenticity mean?" Noah asked. "It means they want to see dishes that represent real traditions, not just fusion for fusion's sake," Sophie said. "They want to understand the story behind the food." Harper joined them for a planning session the next evening, bringing takeout and a journalist's perspective on how to frame their narrative. "You're not just competing as a food truck," she said. "You're representing a particular vision of American food culture, immigrant families using cuisine to build bridges between communities." "That sounds like a lot of pressure," Noah admitted. "It is, but it's also your advantage. The other contestants will have technical skills and fancy equipment, but they won't have your story. They won't have the emotional connection to their food that you do." Over the following weeks, Noah refined his competition dish with obsessive attention to detail. The adobo birria taco had become Root Revival's signature, but for the competition, he needed something that showcased the full range of techniques and flavors that defined their approach to fusion cooking. The breakthrough came during a conversation with Carmen, who had become a regular advisor as the competition approached. She was tasting Noah's latest iteration when she paused, her expression thoughtful. "This is good," she said, "but it's playing it safe. Domingo never played it safe." "What do you mean?" "You're making a perfect taco, but the judges will taste 100 perfect tacos." What made Domingo special was that he wasn't afraid to risk failure. He would take a classic dish and push it so far that it almost broke-canned, then pull it back just enough to make it work. That night, Noah experimented with a more radical interpretation of his signature dish. Instead of serving the adobo birria in a traditional taco format, he deconstructed its low-braised beef served over hand-pressed masa cakes, with the consommé transformed into a reduction that intensified the flavor, and pickled vegetables that provided textural contrast and acidic balance. The result was still recognizably inspired by Filipino and Mexican traditions, but it was something entirely new, a dish that could only exist in the cultural crossroads of the American Southwest. "That's it," Sophie said, tasting the final version. "That's the dish that wins." But creating the perfect dish was only part of the challenge. The competition would take place in front of thousands of spectators and a panel of judges who had seen every variation of fusion cuisine imaginable. Noah needed to be prepared for questions about technique, inspiration, and cultural significance. Carmen helped him practice the presentation, playing the role of skeptical judges who questioned everything from his ingredient choices to his right to combine Filipino and Mexican flavors. "Why tamarind?" she asked during one practice session. "What makes you think you can improve on traditional adobo?" "I'm not trying to improve on tradition," Noah replied, finding his voice. "I'm trying to honor the people who taught me these techniques by showing how their wisdom can create something new without losing what made it special in the first place." The answer felt right, authentic in a way that prepared speeches never could. 2 weeks before the competition, disaster struck in the form of a broken refrigeration unit. The truck's aging cooling system finally gave up during a particularly hot afternoon, threatening not just their competition prep, but their ability to serve customers safely. "The repair estimate is $8,000, the technician told Noah, wiping sweat from his forehead. Honestly, it might be cheaper to replace the whole unit. $8,000 they didn't have, with the competition just days away. Noah sat in the truck's sweltering interior, staring at melting ingredients and trying to figure out how to salvage months of preparation. But Sierra Mesa had become invested in Root Revival's success in ways Noah hadn't fully appreciated. Within hours of word spreading about the refrigeration failure, the community rallied with the same intensity they'd shown during the legal battles with Webb's company. Murphy donated use of his convenience store's walk-in cooler. The Mexican restaurant downtown offered their kitchen for prep work. Mrs. Chen organized a crowdfunding campaign that raised $3,000 in 24 hours. Jimmy Santos and his construction crew volunteered to help install a used refrigeration unit that a restaurant supply company offered at cost. "This is what community looks like," Harper said, documenting the volunteer effort for her podcast. "People who barely knew each other 6 months ago, working together to make sure one family's dream doesn't die." The new refrigeration unit was installed with 3 days to spare, but the crisis had eaten into valuable preparation time. Noah found himself working 18-hour days, perfecting every element of his competition dish, while maintaining regular service to customers who had become family. On the last night, before departing for the state fair, Noah sat in the truck, reading through Maria's recipe journal one final time. Her careful notes and modifications told the story of a woman who understood that cooking was an act of love, that every dish was a bridge between the cook and the people they fed. "Nervous?" Sophie asked, settling beside him on the narrow bench. "Terrified," Noah admitted. 6 months ago, I was just trying to keep us fed and housed. Now, I'm supposed to compete against professional chefs for $100,000. "You're not just competing against them," Leo said, joining them in the truck's cramped interior. "You're representing something they can't replicate." They can learn technique and buy expensive ingredients, but they can't buy the story that brought you here. The next morning, they loaded the truck with competition supplies and set out for Phoenix, where the state fair occupied a sprawling complex of exhibition halls and midway attractions. The drive gave Noah time to think about everything that had led to this moment: Maria's death, the factory closure, the desperate decision to buy a cursed food truck, the community that had rallied around their impossible dream. The competition venue was unlike anything Noah had imagined. The culinary pavilion covered 2 acres, with professional kitchen stations that looked like they belonged in high-end restaurants. Television cameras were positioned throughout the space, and a viewing area could accommodate thousands of spectators. "Holy shit," Leo whispered, then immediately apologized for his language. Noah felt the same way. Their competitors included a team from a James Beard Award-winning restaurant in Scottsdale, a group of culinary school graduates backed by a major food corporation, and a celebrity chef who had her own television show. Root Revival's hand-painted signage and vintage truck looked quaint by comparison. But during the mandatory orientation meeting, Noah began to understand that their outsider status might be an advantage. The other contestants were polished and confident, but they were also focused on impressing judges rather than expressing genuine passion for their food. "Welcome to the 15th annual Great Taste Throwdown," Bill Morrison announced to the assembled contestants. "This year's theme is American Fusion, celebrating the immigrant kitchen. We're looking for dishes that tell the story of how different culinary traditions have combined to create something uniquely American." The theme felt like validation of everything Root Revival represented. While other contestants scrambled to adjust their planned dishes, Noah felt a quiet confidence that his adobo birria creation was exactly what the competition was designed to celebrate. The preliminary round would begin the next morning, with 24 contestants competing for 12 spots in the second round. Each team had 2 hours to prepare their signature dish for a panel of 3 judges who would taste blind no knowledge of the cook's identity or background. That evening, Noah walked through the fairgrounds with the twins, trying to calm his nerves while taking in the carnival atmosphere. Families moved between food stands and game booths, creating the kind of joyful chaos that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with food service in the first place. "Dad," Sophie said, stopping at a small stand selling kettle corn, "whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know how proud I am. Not just of the truck, but of how you've handled everything. Mom would be proud too." The words hit Noah harder than he'd expected. For months, he'd been so focused on survival and success that he'd barely allowed himself to think about Maria's opinion of their journey. But he realized that everything they'd built, the community connections, the cultural bridge building, the refusal to give up in the face of adversity reflected values that she'd embodied throughout their marriage. The morning of the first round, Noah arrived at the competition kitchen before dawn. He needed time to center himself, to review his preparation timeline, and to transform the sterile cooking station into something that felt like home. Carmen appeared as he was arranging his ingredients, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the same supportive smile she'd offered throughout their preparation. Domingo used to say that cooking was just organized. "Dreaming," she told him, settling into a nearby chair. "Today, you get to show the world what your dreams taste like." The other contestants began arriving, wheeling in cases of expensive equipment and exotic ingredients. Noah watched a team from Scottsdale unpack what looked like a complete molecular gastronomy laboratory, while the celebrity chef's assistants arranged ingredients that probably cost more than Root Revival's entire monthly budget. But when the judges entered a stern-looking woman with a James Beard Award pin, a jovial man Noah recognized from cooking shows, and Bill Morrison himself, Noah felt the nervous energy transform into focused determination. "Contestants," Morrison announced, "you have 2 hours to prepare your signature dish. Judging will be completely blind. We'll taste without knowing who prepared what. Your time starts now." The kitchen erupted into controlled chaos. 24 teams began cooking simultaneously, the air filling with sizzling sounds and aromatic clouds that created an almost overwhelming sensory experience. Noah forced himself to ignore the competition and focus on his own work, moving through the preparation sequence he'd practiced dozens of times. First, the beef chunks of short rib and chuck roast that had been marinating overnight in his refined version of Maria's adobo blend. Into a heavy Dutch oven with rendered bacon fat, building layers of flavor that would define the entire dish. Then the masa, cakes fresh corn masa, pressed thin and cooked on a cast-iron griddle until they developed the perfect balance of crispy exterior and tender interior. Each cake had to be identical, uniform in size and color, professional in presentation. The consommé reduction came next, the braising liquid from the beef, strained and intensified until it became a glossy, concentrated essence of the dish's core flavors. This was the component that would either elevate the dish to excellence or reveal any flaws in the base preparation. Finally, the pickled vegetables, a careful balance of Filipino and Mexican techniques that provided acidic contrast and textural variety. Radishes and onions that had been quick pickled in a solution of calamansi juice, rice vinegar, and just enough sugar to balance the tartness. With 30 minutes remaining, Noah began plating. Each serving had to be identical, restaurant quality in presentation, but still recognizable as food that came from the heart rather than a laboratory. "Time!" Morrison called, and 24 dishes were wheeled forward for blind judging. Noah stepped back from his station, sweat-soaked and exhausted but confident that he'd executed his vision perfectly. Now all he could do was wait, watch the judges taste each dish in silence, and hope that his story would speak through the food itself. The judges moved through the 24 dishes with methodical precision, tasting each one in silence while making notes on clipboards that would determine who advanced to the second round. Noah watched from the designated waiting area, trying to read expressions that remained professionally neutral throughout the process. When they reached his dish number 17 in the lineup, Noah felt his heart rate spike. The James Beard winner took a careful bite, chewed thoughtfully, then reached for a second taste. The television personality followed suit, his eyebrows raising slightly in what Noah hoped was approval. Bill Morrison was last, and when he tasted the dish, his expression shifted in a way that made Noah's chest tighten with anticipation. "Contestants," Morrison announced after the judges had finished their deliberation, "will now announce the 12 teams advancing to tomorrow's semi-final round." The names were called in alphabetical order, which meant Noah had to wait through an agonizing procession before hearing Root Revival announced as the 11th qualifier. The relief was overwhelming, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the real competition was just beginning. The eliminated contestants packed their equipment with varying degrees of grace. Some offered congratulations to the advancing teams, while others muttered about politics and hometown favoritism. Noah felt sympathy for their disappointment, but he was also grateful that Root Revival would have another chance to prove itself. "How did it feel?" Harper asked, her recording equipment capturing the post-round interviews. She'd been documenting the entire competition for her podcast, and Noah was getting used to having his reactions preserved for posterity. "Like the first time I cooked for Maria's family," Noah said honestly. "Terrifying, but also right. Like this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." That evening, the remaining contestants gathered for a brief orientation about the semi-final round. The format would be more challenging. Each team would have 3 hours to prepare a 3-course meal that demonstrated their culinary philosophy, with one course required to feature a mystery ingredient that wouldn't be revealed until the cooking began. "The mystery ingredient will test your ability to adapt and innovate under pressure," Morrison explained. "It's designed to separate the technicians from the true chefs, the people who can create something meaningful from whatever ingredients they're given." Back in their hotel room, Noah, Sophie, and Leo strategized about possible mystery ingredients and how they might incorporate them into a cohesive 3-course meal. They'd planned a menu that built on the adobo birria theme, an appetizer featuring lumpia Shanghai with jalapeno aioli, the refined adobo birria as a main course, and a dessert that combined ube ice cream with Mexican chocolate and cinnamon. The key is flexibility, Leo said, consulting his research on previous competitions. Past mystery ingredients have included everything from duck hearts to durian fruit. We need to be ready to adapt any course if necessary. What if it's something we've never worked with? Sophie asked. Then we treat it like any other ingredient, Noah said, feeling more confident than he had any right to. We taste it, understand what it brings to a dish, and find a way to make it work with our flavors. The morning of the semi-final round, Noah woke before dawn with nervous energy that felt different from the previous day's anxiety. Instead of fear, he felt anticipation, the excitement of a craftsman who was ready to demonstrate mastery of his art. The remaining 12 teams assembled in the competition kitchen at 8 a.m. sharp. The celebrity chef looked as polished as ever, but Noah noticed that some of her assistants seemed strained by the pressure. The culinary school team was discussing strategy in hushed tones, while the Scottsdale restaurant group was methodically checking their equipment. Route Revival's station looked modest by comparison, but Noah had learned to trust in simplicity. Their equipment was basic but functional. Their ingredients were fresh and thoughtfully chosen, and their techniques were grounded in traditions that had been tested across generations. Contestants, Morrison announced, today's mystery ingredient is. He paused for dramatic effect, then revealed a large covered tray. Fresh rabbit. Noah felt a moment of panic, then forced himself to approach the ingredient analytically. Rabbit was lean, delicate, and took well to slow braising techniques. It wasn't traditional to Filipino or Mexican cuisine, but it shared characteristics with other proteins he'd worked with. More importantly, rabbit represented exactly the kind of adaptation that had defined immigrant cooking throughout American history, taking whatever protein was available and transforming it using familiar techniques and flavors. "Your time starts now," Morrison called, and the kitchen exploded into activity. Noah's first decision was to feature the rabbit in his main course, adapting his adobo technique to work with the leaner meat. He broke down the rabbit quickly, separating the tender loin meat for quick cooking and the tougher leg portions for a longer braise that would create the rich sauce his dish required. Around him, other contestants were making different choices. The celebrity chef was preparing rabbit rillettes for her appetizer course, while the culinary school team was attempting a complex rabbit confit that required precise temperature control. "How are you feeling?" Sophie asked, helping him prep vegetables for the braise. "Good," Noah said, and realized it was true. "This feels like the kind of problem-solving we do every day at the truck. Different protein, same principles." The rabbit adobo came together beautifully, the meat's delicate flavor enhanced rather than overwhelmed by the traditional spice blend. Noah adjusted the technique he'd developed for beef, reducing the cooking time and increasing the acidity to complement the rabbit's natural characteristics. For his appetizer, he stuck with the planned lumpia Shanghai, but added finely diced rabbit liver to the fillinger technique he remembered from Carmen's stories about her grandmother's cooking. The liver provided richness and complexity while honoring the mystery ingredient requirement. The dessert remained unchanged dube ice cream with Mexican chocolate sauce, but Noah plated it with candied cinnamon tulle cookies shaped like rabbit ears, a playful reference that acknowledged the challenge while maintaining the dish's cultural integrity. With 1 hour remaining, Noah began the final plating process. Each course had to be identical across 6 servings, restaurant quality in presentation, and ready for service within the narrow window the judges required. The rabbit adobo was plated over coconut rice, with the reduced braising liquid forming pools of glossy sauce around carefully arranged vegetables. The presentation honored both Filipino and Mexican aesthetics, while creating something that belonged to neither tradition exclusively. 30 minutes, Morrison called, and Noah could feel the energy in the kitchen reaching fever pitch. 2 stations down, the celebrity chef was struggling with a sauce that refused to emulsify properly. Across the aisle, the culinary school team was frantically trying to rescue a rabbit preparation that had overcooked during the final minutes. "Time!" Morrison shouted, and 12 three-course meals were wheeled forward for judging. Noah stepped back from his station, exhausted but satisfied. He'd executed his vision cleanly, adapted successfully to the mystery ingredient, and created food that told a coherent story across all 3 courses. Now all he could do was wait and hope that the judges would taste not just technique and flavor, but the love and history that had gone into every element of the meal. The judges' deliberation lasted 2 hours, long enough for Noah to second-guess every decision he'd made during the cooking process. He replayed the rabbit preparation in his mind, wondering if he'd seasoned the adobo correctly, if the coconut rice had been cooked to the proper texture, if the lumpia filling had achieved the right balance of flavors. "You're overthinking it," Carmen said, appearing beside him in the waiting area with coffee and the kind of maternal concern that had become familiar over the past months. "The food was beautiful. I watched you cook, and you were completely in control." "It didn't feel controlled," Noah admitted. "It felt like barely contained chaos." "That's what confidence looks like when you're doing something that matters," Carmen replied. Domingo used to say that cooking without fear was just following recipes. Real cooking required risking failure. When Morrison finally emerged from the judges' room, his expression was unreadable. The remaining contestants gathered in the presentation area, where television cameras captured their nervous anticipation for what would become the most watched segment of the competition. "This was an extraordinary round of cooking," Morrison began. "The quality was uniformly high, and the creativity in adapting to the mystery ingredient exceeded our expectations. However, only 3 teams can advance to tomorrow's final round." The announcements came in reverse order, building suspense for the television audience but increasing Noah's anxiety with each passing second. Third place in today's semi-final, advancing to tomorrow's championship round, the team from Desert Bloom Culinary Academy. The culinary students erupted in celebration, their instructor pumping his fist in victory. Noah felt happy for them. They'd worked hard and deserved recognition, but his own stomach was knotting with tension. Second place, also advancing to the final round, Chef Isabella Martinez from Sonoran Star Restaurant. The celebrity chef smiled graciously, but Noah could see relief in her expression. She'd been considered a favorite from the beginning, and advancing to the final round validated that status, which meant Noah was either first or eliminated, and the winner of today's semi-final round, earning the first position in tomorrow's championship. Morrison paused, his eyes finding Noah in the crowd. Noah Alvarez from Root Revival Food Truck. The words hit Noah like a physical force. First place. He'd not only advanced to the finals, he'd won the semi-final round outright. Around him, the crowd erupted in applause, but the sound seemed distant and unreal. "Dad!" Sophie's voice cut through the noise as she threw herself into his arms, followed immediately by Leo, whose usual analytical composure had given way to pure joy. "I can't believe it," Noah whispered, holding his children close. "I actually can't believe we did it." Harper was there too, her recording equipment capturing the moment for her podcast audience. "How does it feel to be in the championship round?" she asked. "Surreal," Noah said honestly. "6 months ago, I was cleaning out my locker at the factory. Now I'm competing for $100,000 against some of the best chefs in the Southwest." The evening celebration was subdued. Noah needed to rest and prepare for the final round, but the hotel room felt electric with possibility. The twins spread out their competition research on the beds, analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of the remaining competitors. "Chef Martinez is technically perfect," Leo said, reading from his notes. "But her food is safe, conservative." The judges' comments today mentioned that they wanted to see more personality in her dishes. "The Culinary Academy team is creative and hungry," Sophie added. "But they're young. They might try too hard to impress with complexity instead of focusing on flavor." "And us?" Noah asked. "We're the story," Sophie said simply. "We're not just cooking food. We're representing something larger than ourselves, The judges can taste that. The final round format was straightforward but daunting. Each team would have 4 hours to prepare a 5-course tasting menu that represented their culinary philosophy. No mystery ingredients, no restrictions, just an opportunity to showcase their highest level of cooking. The prize structure was equally simple. Winner takes all. $100,000 for first place, recognition and respect for the runners. Up, but no consolation prizes. That night, Noah called Patricia Morales to check on the legal situation with Webb's company. The news was encouraging. Webb had been charged with multiple felonies. His company was being investigated by state regulators, and preliminary settlement discussions suggested that Root Revival might actually receive compensation for the harassment they'd endured. "You've become something of a poster child for small business rights," Patricia told him. "Harper's coverage has brought national attention to predatory lending practices. There's talk of congressional hearings." The irony wasn't lost on Noah. In trying to destroy Root Revival, Webb had inadvertently created a platform for challenging the systems that exploited vulnerable entrepreneurs. The morning of the final round, Noah woke with unusual calm. The nervous energy of previous days had been replaced by something deeper, not confidence exactly, but acceptance of whatever outcome awaited them. His 5-course menu told the story of Root Revival's journey through food, an amuse-bouche featuring ube and coconut that represented hope in desperate circumstances. A salad course that combined Filipino and Mexican vegetables in unexpected harmony. A seafood course that honored his wife's coastal heritage. The signature adobo birria as the main course. And finally, a dessert that brought together all the cultural influences that had shaped their family's story. "Ready?" Morrison asked, as the 3 remaining teams took their positions in the competition kitchen. Noah looked at his ingredients, each one chosen for its role in the narrative he wanted to tell, and felt Maria's presence in a way he hadn't experienced since her death. Not sadness or loss, but the sustaining warmth of love that transcends physical presence. "Ready," he said. "Your time starts now." The final round unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Noah moved through his preparation with the efficiency that came from months of cooking in the truck's cramped space, each motion economical and purposeful. Around him, his competitors were executing their own visions. Chef Martinez was preparing what looked like a modernist interpretation of Southwestern classics, while the Culinary Academy team was attempting an ambitious menu that incorporated molecular gastronomy techniques. But Noah stayed focused on his own work, building flavors layer by layer, honoring the traditions that had brought him to this moment while creating something entirely new. With 1 hour remaining, Bill Morrison approached Noah's station with the kind of casual attention that experienced food professionals use to mask intense interest. "How are you feeling?" Morrison asked. "Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Noah replied, plating his 3rd course with steady hands. Morrison smiled, the first genuine expression Noah had seen from him during the competition. "Domingo would be proud," he said quietly. This is exactly the kind of cooking he believed in. As time expired and the final dishes were plated, Noah felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with winning or losing. He told his story through food, honored the people who had brought him to this moment, and created something beautiful in the process. The rest was up to the judges. The judges' final deliberation lasted 3 hours, during which Noah sat in the green tent behind the competition kitchen, alternately pacing and staring at his phone. Text messages poured in from customers back in Sierra Mesa, from food truck owners across the Southwest, from people who had followed their story through Harper's podcast and social media coverage. "Win or lose," Carmen said, settling beside him on a folding chair, "you've already accomplished something extraordinary. You've shown that the American dream isn't just alive, it's thriving in the hands of people who refuse to give up." When Morrison finally called the contestants back to the presentation stage, Noah felt strangely calm. The crowd had grown throughout the day, and now several hundred people filled the viewing area, including familiar faces from Sierra Mesa who had driven to Phoenix to support Root Revival. This has been the most competitive final round in the history of the Great Taste Throwdown, Morrison announced. All three teams delivered exceptional food that showcased technical skill, creativity, and genuine passion for their craft. The judges took turns, offering commentary on each menu. Chef Martinez received praise for her technical execution and refined presentations. The Culinary Academy team was commended for their ambition and innovative techniques. When they reached Noah's menu, the James Beard winner spoke first. "This was storytelling through food at its finest," she said. Every course built on the previous one, creating a narrative that was both deeply personal and universally accessible. The adobo birria course, in particular, was extraordinary technique and tradition, perfectly balanced. The television personality nodded in agreement. What impressed me most was the restraint. With 5 courses, there's always a temptation to show off, to pile on complexity for its own sake. Instead, each dish felt necessary, purposeful. This is the work of a mature chef who understands that the best food serves the story, not the ego. Morrison was last. 28 years ago, I tasted Domingo Reyes's winning dish at this same competition. Today, I tasted that same spirit, the belief that food can bridge any divide, that technique serves tradition rather than replacing it. This is exactly what American cuisine should be. The formal announcement followed the traditional format, building suspense for the television cameras. Third place went to the Culinary Academy team, who accepted their recognition with the enthusiasm of young chefs who had exceeded their own expectations. Second place was awarded to Chef Martinez, who smiled graciously despite what had to be disappointment. She'd been considered the favorite, but sometimes the best technique couldn't compete with the best story. And the winner of this year's Great Taste Throwdown, earning the grand prize of $100,000. Morrison's pause felt endless. Noah Alvarez from Root Revival Food Truck. The world exploded into sound and motion. The crowd erupted in cheers, cameras flashed, and suddenly Noah was surrounded by people congratulating him and asking for interviews. But all he could focus on were Sophie and Leo, their faces bright with joy and pride. "We did it," Sophie whispered as they embraced. "We actually did it." "You did it, Dad," Leo corrected, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved us." But Noah knew better. He hadn't saved them, they'd saved each other. The truck had been the catalyst, but the real strength had come from their refusal to give up, their willingness to work together, and the community that had rallied around their impossible dream. The prize money changed everything and nothing. Within 6 months, Noah had purchased a permanent location for Root Revival, a small building in downtown Sierra Mesa that housed both a restaurant and a commissary kitchen. But he kept the truck too, taking it to festivals and special events, honoring the journey that had brought them so far. More importantly, he partnered with Carmen to launch the Root Revival Foundation, a non-profit organization that provided refurbished food trucks, business training, and microloans to struggling families who wanted to start their own food businesses. The program's first year helped 23 families launch successful ventures, from a Korean-Mexican fusion truck in Tucson to a soul food operation in Flagstaff. Sophie received the art scholarship to State University, where she studied community-engaged design and created murals for small businesses throughout the Southwest. Her senior thesis projector series of murals documenting immigrant food traditions was featured in a gallery exhibition that traveled to museums across the region. Leo graduated as valedictorian and received a full scholarship to study computer science at Arizona State University. His senior project was a mobile app that helped food truck owners coordinate locations, share resources, and build customer communities. The app launched with 500 food trucks across the Southwest and expanded nationally within 2 years. 3 years after the Great Taste Throwdown victory, Noah signed the deed to a house in Sierra Mesa, a mansion, but a comfortable home with a kitchen, large enough for the whole family to cook together, and a backyard where Sophie could paint and Leo could work on his programming projects. The housewarming party was held on a Saturday evening in October, with the doors thrown open and the scent of adobo drifting through every room. The guest list included everyone who had been part of their journey: Carmen and Harper, Patricia Morales, and Father Miguel, Mrs. Partis, Chen and Murphy, the construction crew who had helped repair the truck, and dozens of customers who had become friends. As the evening wound down and the last guests headed home, Noah stood in his kitchen, in his own house, and marveled at how far they'd traveled from that cramped motel room where their story had begun. "Dad," Sophie said, joining him at the window that looked out over the backyard. "Do you ever miss it? The uncertainty, the struggle?" Noah considered the question seriously. "I miss the intensity," he said finally, "the feeling that every day was an adventure, that we were building something from nothing. But I don't miss the fear. I don't miss wondering if we'd have enough money for rent or groceries." "What do you miss most about Mom?" Leo asked, appearing with a plate of leftover food from the party. It was a question the twins asked periodically, usually on important occasions when Maria's absence felt most acute. Noah had learned to answer honestly, without trying to shield them from the reality of grief. "I miss her certainty," he said, "not that she always knew what to do, but that she never doubted we'd figure it out together. She had this ability to make impossible things feel manageable." "You have that now too," Sophie said softly. "You learned it." Later that night, after the twins had gone to their rooms and the house had settled into comfortable quiet, Noah sat at his kitchen table with Maria's recipe journal open in front of him. He'd been adding his own recipes to the collection, the dishes he'd developed for Root Revival, the fusion experiments that had grown from Carmen's stories and Domingo's techniques. But tonight he was writing something different, a letter to Maria, telling her about their journey, about the children they'd raised together, about the community they'd built and the dreams they'd achieved. The letter would never be sent, of course, but writing it felt like closing a circle that had been left open since her death. It was a way of acknowledging that their story continued even after death, that love persisted across any distance. Outside, the desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. In the distance, Noah could see the lights of Sierra Massano, longer a dying town, but a community that had learned to believe in itself again, one small business and one impossible dream at a time. Tomorrow, he would get up early and drive to the Root Revival restaurant, where he would prep vegetables and season meat and serve food that told the story of his family's journey from desperation to hope. He would train new food truck owners and help other struggling families find their own paths to success. But tonight, he was exactly where he belonged, in his own kitchen, in his own house, with the scent of adobo still lingering in the air and the certain knowledge that when hope rides an open road, every mile can taste like a new beginning.